Hello and welcome to a special edition of the AI Native Dev. Joining myself today, Simon Maple, is Guy Podjarny. Guy, welcome.
Hello. Live and ready to go.
Guy, we are live. This is a new format. We are live for the AI Native Dev monthly roundup. What could possibly go wrong? We're going to do a few things today. We're going to first of all talk through a number of the key takeaways from this month's episodes. Today, in October, we talked to Armon Dadgar. I think we started the month talking with Armon, who is one of the co-founders of HashiCorp. We talked a little bit about you talked a little bit about how AI can help with the generation of infrastructure, a little bit about some of the defaults that you get with that, some of the concerns, and a little bit about AI and DevOps. The week after I talked with Liran Tal, talking all over AI security, whether LLMs can generate secure code, or whether even if you ask it's to create secure examples, you will still get insecure code. The week after that was Patrick Debois, talking a lot about some of the lessons learned from his experiences and our experiences as an industry, from our cultural journey in adopting DevOps, what we can take away from that and actually use as part of our adoption of AI. And just this week, in fact, yesterday, we launched the episode with Amara Graham, who's a senior dev role. Senior dev role at Camunda, talking about their adoption of AI agents in terms of providing relevant documentation to users. So, Guy, we've got a ton to get through.
Really fun episodes. And we're not you should all kind of go check out and sort of listen to these things or these conversations that relate to your world on it, because they're all kind of packed. We're just going to scratch the surface over here. I will say that it was really fun listening to you and Liran banter around. For those who are unfamiliar with the context of it, Simon, sadly, is sort of a Java true fan. I shouldn't say sadly, although
I was going to say
Liran is a big JavaScript fan, and this is an age-long back and forth between but there was a lot of nostalgia over there. It is also a little bit funny to sort of hear two sneakers, one active, one X, talking about vulnerabilities in open source. So fun conversation above and beyond the content itself.
Absolutely, yeah. So we're going to get to that in just a second, but we want to talk about some news first. For those listening, if you wanted to hear more of sessions just like that, make sure you subscribe. We're available on Apple Podcast, on Spotify, and many other providers. So feel free to subscribe so you get notified of future episodes. Let's get into some news. Yesterday was GitHub Universe, Gaipo, and there's some very interesting discussions. One of them that caught my eye was how GitHub Copilot has gone multi-model effectively. So developers can now choose between which model they're effectively using under the covers, whether that's any of OpenAI's models, whether that's Claude 3.5 Sonnet, or whether it's Gemini 1.5 Pro. Thoughts on that? That's an interesting move, right? Giving developers that choice, but it's also leaning a little bit away from their OpenAI roots.
I want to start with a bit of a deep thinking comment on it, which is I'm really annoyed by the choice of the words model and model in those. So as a non-native speaker on it, and I know, Simon, you've had some challenges with pronunciations in the past on it.
Yeah. Java's my first language.
Multimodal? Is it multimodal? Because I think Anthropic have a multimodal. Actually, a bunch of these sort of doing it at the same time. Anyways, so in this case, I guess you have to be very punctual with sort of the the phrasing over here. Yeah, the multimodal. Look, it's interesting. It's interesting how GitHub. Microsoft has kind of put tons of money into OpenAI, and I believe has the rights to use OpenAI's IP and have all sorts of favorable agreements with them. And so it's interesting commercially, right, that GitHub, who is clearly part of Microsoft, is giving this choice. I think at the end of the day, humans and any user of any of these systems is very default driven. And so if the default is GPT, which I believe it is, or I'm assuming it is, it's probably going to be vast majority, but so it's a nice touch. But still, even making the investment to be able to sort of choose different models is an interesting move by GitHub. Generally, I'd sort of say good for users, right? We get to choose those, and I wouldn't be surprised if behind the scenes enterprises now or later would be able to sort of plug in their choice of whatever enterprise certified model came in.
And also somewhat good for Microsoft as well, right? Because if you think about it, if certain people are already making an investment in Claude, that, why would Microsoft want you not to use GitHub Copilot, the tooling, whereas the model is actually becoming a little bit more commoditized there, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's a little bit along the lines of what they do in Azure and all the clouds, right? Like you want to be able to run with all of them, but maybe there's a cost and a contract, and there's like other reasons to sort of lure you into the home platform. But still, great to see it. I will, like, for those who haven't played with AI, it's not as trivial. The APIs are like super identical. Like whatever, call LLM of your choice and pass some conversation object and doing it very easy to abstract. The actual choice of the prompts and how is it that you kind of make them work well and all of those, a lot of similarities, but really not at all the same, especially when you get into like the fine details of engineering. And so from an investment perspective, it's not that trivial. No, that's of course assuming that they've done a good job kind of making them work equally well in all these different platforms. But still, it's interesting. It was a good announcement to see.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a second announcement, actually. One of the big ones is GitHub Spark. And for those of you who didn't see the announcement or have been off social media for a couple of days, GitHub Spark is effectively another AI-powered tool, but it allows you to create these things called Sparks, which are micro apps. And you can effectively, using natural language, describe the application you want. And without apparently writing any code or deploying any code, you'll have an application which is running in a managed runtime that hosts these Sparks, these micro apps, and you have other things behind it. If you wanted like mini databases, like data storage, those kind of things, you can change the theme of your Spark, and yeah, effectively you can stand that up to be used across mobile or your desktop applications. This seemed like a fairly big step from what GitHub already had with their their Copilot, particularly with that kind of REPL style of running things. AI native was used a lot. I'd love to hear your opinion on whether this is truly AI native or whether this is just
everybody loves the term now.
The next step to it. Yeah. Well, we got there first with the podcast, right?
Of course, of course, and nobody really means it quite correctly as we do on the.
Yeah, exactly.
It's always the case, and as is a sentence that anybody would sort of say. I think that one, I think, like sort of got a little bit more sort of I don't know, sort of noise than it really deserved. Like it's a good move, but it's a bit of a Me Too type move, right? We had Felipe on the podcast before, doing also showcasing all sorts of great work that he's done on Anthropic artifacts and projects with them. It's that they were probably the true pioneer over here. OpenAI has since launched Canvas. There's like open source Bolt that kind of creates applications, actually goes further away. And so, it's still interesting, and I'm generally in favor of AI native development. I think people should be sort of trying all sorts of approaches to developing with AI, and so I'm in favor of them doing it. And maybe the fact that there's like a direct tie to the Git repo behind the scenes is a little bit different, but otherwise it feels like more of the same. So again, still generally supportive of it. Yeah. But I think maybe what it does speak to is just the fact that GitHub has a certain megaphone that expands to developers that is different to what Anthropic or OpenAI have, and so it's just interesting to sort of see people maybe get exposed to these for the first time because of the GitHub path. But at this point, I think it's like a tried and true path of like, give me a blurb and I will create something. And especially for things that are like very simple web applications in which the visuals are very clear, verification is both simple. Hey, did it create the buttons correctly, the layout correctly? I pushed the button, did it do what I want? And also very visual, like very like non-hidden. And V0, just like all these different applications do that. I'm not sure if it's a sustainable path. Like they still generate the code, and then you kind of have to deal with the code and build from it. But it's become, I think, like now like a pattern, which we've sort of seen in all this LLM world, right? Like one player does something, and then within 3 to 6 months, it was novel at the time, and 3 to 6 months, everybody has it.
Yeah, and it's interesting actually because the announcement came out. There's a lot of noise, but actually I was looking at this thinking there's nothing we haven't seen here before compared to what other people have done or will do. A number of people on socials were talking about, oh my gosh, this is going to be the death of Cursor. And I thought, actually, it's a very different workflow to Cursor. Like Cursor, you're in an IDE, you can play with code as much as using then an AI chat agent or something like that to kind of like, help you build that code. Whereas, you mentioned the session actually that Felipe gave, and actually I noticed Felipe's on the listening live as well. So hello, Felipe.
Very nice. Hey, Felipe.
But yeah, you mentioned that, and what he was showing there with Anthropic's artifact support, that feels more like that, particularly with the REPL that they have had for months now, showing the React example. So you can build up some React and it will show you that live in its own little REPL that you can click around with. The interesting thing is actually being able to stand that app up and actually use that within their kind of their directory, effectively launching the sparks, as it were, and some of that additional support behind the scenes. But yeah, maybe that was more the kind of like area that I thought was the interesting bit as well. But again, with things like Vercel and V0, a lot of these things kind of
they do deploy that as well. So like when you see this from platform, I mean, it's a good point, which is when you think about Anthropic or OpenAI providing them, they don't have the end-to-end platform. And so they might be generating it and you might be plugging it into something to be able to execute it, to version it, to do these things. While GitHub, might have the long-term element. Vercel with V0 might have that sort of long-term like place to plug it into for you to continue evolving it. The continued evolution basically comes back to like, these are just bootstraps. They're about get started, which is fine and is valuable. But at the end of the day, when you think about the life of a developer and how often do you bootstrap a project versus how often do you evolve it, do you maintain it, do you doing it? I mean, it's a fraction of the time. So again, cool wow effect for sure. Not terribly novel, generally positive development, but I wasn't terribly impressed. A little bit of a spoiler, which is there's an episode we've not yet aired, but I've already recorded with Matt Billman from Netlify, CEO and co-founder of Netlify, and we talk about Bolt a little bit over there and about deployments to Netlify and some of the advantage there. So you can hear a bit more about that in the next episode.
Absolutely. Make sure you subscribe to get notified of that episode as it comes out next Tuesday, I believe. So let's move on. More news. We at Tessel have announced the lineup for our new virtual AI native DevCon. There are still some slots left, and so don't worry too much if you're on the CFP but haven't been notified just yet. We are still working out the final slots there. But yeah, it's on the 21st of November. It is running from 4 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. UK time, which is 11 a.m. through to 5:30 p.m. Eastern time. So we're mostly trying to get as many of the US folks as well as the European folks as we can. But hey, time zones are hard. It's hard. You can't please everyone. We've got a number of speakers who have already announced, Guipo, yourself included. We have Lisa Reyes, who's going to be talking to us about a number of dev tools that you can use AI and really get effective development processes with today. So there's a lot of practical sessions. We have Patrick Debois, who's going to be talking about what's next in AI code assistance and things like that. We have Tanya Yanka as well, who's an amazing speaker. She's going to be providing us with some great insights around security with AI. We have Jason Han from Datadog. We have Itamar Friedman from Codium, who is now, how do you pronounce that guy? I'm going to leave that to you.
What, Codium?
Yeah, well, not Codium, the new Codium.
Codium AI, yeah, Codium without an E.
Is it Codo?
That's very unfortunate, I gotta say. Like for Codium and Codium, for the sort of the two.
They rebranded. They rebranded, right? They're now Codo. QODO, I think, right?
Oh, no, I'm hearing that news live.
There we go. We're back into the.
You can tell I was away with the family for a few days.
Yeah.
In the world of AI, that's like a year's worth of news.
You shouldn't be taking family vacation in the AI
space. If you work with AI, you cannot take vacation. No,
absolutely, yeah. It all changes. So yeah, so Codium, arguably one of the biggest testing groups in the AI space, rebranded to Codo. They're a partner of the conference as well as giving a session. So yeah, feel free to register for that conference, AINativeDev.io. It's free to register, and we'll record everything and make that available to you.
Yeah, and I'm super excited that we're running the conference, not just because of the sort of the great talks around it, but because really, like we think of AI native development as a dev movement, right? We think about our role in it as a place to kind of give all these brilliant people a space, a platform to share their perspective, to talk about the work that they're doing, they're evolving it. And while we invest and are confident that we're able to contribute to this conversation and this sort of shaping of this new paradigm of development, we think of this as a group activity, and I think we have some really, really exciting talks and kind of enlightening ones. So I'm excited for this one, and I'm excited that we're getting started on what will be a recurring conference for us.
Absolutely. And one thing that we would love as well, we're all about collaboration in and around AI native because nothing's set in stone here. So as Sammy mentioned, if you've got questions, first of all, for this session, feel free to pop them in the comments and we'll address them as much as we can live. Also, if you have any feedback around the format of this show, around guests that you'd like, topics that you'd like, not just around the AI Dev podcast, but also about the AI Native conference, let us know, because this is, like Guy says, this is a recurring format, and we'll absolutely take that feedback on board and try and add that into future episodes and versions. So, talking about the podcast, Guy, we had some great sessions, as I mentioned before. Actually, a lot of the theme this month was in and around infrastructure, in and around DevOps, in a little bit about security. We had one of Amara's session actually, which probably didn't actually fit very well with the overall month's themes.
Yeah,
but I want to talk about that. Yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit because it did actually sit really well with a couple of previous talks that we had, and incidentally with Tamar Yehoshua from Glean. I think she's the head of product, is she? Or
yeah, she's I think she's the president there, but specifically leads product as well. Yeah.
And also, it kind of reminded me a little bit about some of the discussions that you had with Des Traynor about the idea that the differences that how people react, first of all, to a search versus a chatbot. And with search, people just tend to throw in a couple of terms. With a chatbot, people tend to or try to more talk in full sentences, and it's very interesting to see. I think with how Des was talking was people who talked knowingly, like this user or this bot rather is an LLM in the background rather than some kind of like search functionality. People got better results, and it was kind of similar in terms of the reaction that Amara discussed with how people were using the Camunda site to use an LLM to go and find information and find documentation for her.
Yeah.
That uses Kappa AI in the background. So yeah, definitely take a listen to that as
I really liked the perspective of a user. I think like a lot of the people that we, this is a new world, and so naturally the people that we get to come in and talk about it, like there's a good portion of those who are building tools kind of in this space. It was interesting to hear Amara's perspective as a builder in terms of like adopter of these tools, but kind of her experience indeed in engaging and using tools, in this case Kappa, for engaging with documentation. But yeah, it comes back like a lot of recurring themes, and I felt the same thing about sort of the echoes back to the first episode with Des talking about people engaging with the chat interface. Yeah. And what is it that they ask, and how do you know if they're going to get it right? I also really liked her comment about kind of learning more what people are searching for by sort of seeing what they ask about the documentation when they come and engage with it. And I think that's interesting because we do this like when you have docs today, you talk to users, you try to understand how they use the product, you try to build your documentation to, on one hand, reflect the product and its philosophy, and on the other hand, see how our developers integrating with the APIs, and if we're talking about sort of dev tools, right? How are they using it? So you're putting, there's oftentimes a lot of information, so you're trying to scaffold the paths that are useful for developers to learn about. But how do you find out if those are the right ones or not? You can do that a little bit with like search queries and sort of see what did people search to be able to arrive. But chat can give you actually like much more detailed interaction, because they're like pseudo talking to an entity there, and they're saying, well, I'm trying to do XYZ, and I'm getting an answer, or did it not have the answer, or was the answer a little bit weird? And so I think it's a really interesting kind of user discovery path, which I found to be an interesting insight. So yeah, really interesting, and in general, I guess again for those listening, it'll be great to know from you what's more interesting to you, or like to what level, to hear more about the sort of the builders of the tools, those who build inside, those who build products for you to use, but also how interesting is it to you to talk about people who are trying to use a bunch of these AI dev tools to help their sort of developer experiences be better, and if there are things that you want. So I thought that was a really good episode from that front. I agree, a little bit like out of theme, maybe more like last month's episodes in terms of grouping. So it's getting a little bit the short straw here in the summary.
Absolutely, but let us know if you want more episodes like that. Podcast at Tessel.io, and we'll absolutely get more on for you. Let's go into talking more about the DevOps, the infrastructure style, which we had a couple of episodes. First of all, when we think about how you can use AI to help generate infrastructure, we always talk about generation of things versus the maintenance, kind of like a little bit as you alluded to at the very start. Let's start with the generation and we'll move on to the maintenance.
The next steps over there. Yeah.
One thing that was really interesting that was kind of like mentioned was, first of all, it was easier, or rather maybe not easier, but you're more likely to get accurate results when you're trying to generate infrastructure versus code, because code, from a syntax point of view, there are many ways to do the same thing. With infrastructure, there are presumably more kind of like paved road patterns at which you can do certain things.
Yeah.
Would you say that
a
was
little
fair?
bit like, I think it's like a little bit less about sort of generating infrastructure per se, but rather infrastructure as code.
Yes.
So if you look at like the richness of Terraform or even Puppet or Chef, like any of these or Pulumi, the richness of language is much smaller. They're a lot more declarative. Many of them actually have like YAML kind of roots and things like that that are very declarative. And so basically there's like less ways to do the same thing, fewer ways, and also fewer mistakes maybe to do in the process. And so for the AI, it's just easier to tell it to follow instructions. Like if you ask AI to whatever, like write a function that sorts an array, there are 1,000 ways in which the same action can be done. And in Terraform, it's not the case, or like there are fewer ways to doing it. So it's just sort of technically easier to create something in Terraform. But of course, like the catch that Armon has pointed out, and we talked about, is like the implications are pretty substantial, right? Like, you're and we had I think like my favorite example, from him was kind of the comment on S3, which is, hey, I said you want to create an S3 bucket, but is that might have been actually my comment on it. He had a better one after, right? Like, so do you want that to be a public or a private S3 bucket? And that's a good one, because there isn't like a right or wrong decision. But what I liked even more is his conversation about an instance. It's like, hey, create an instance for me. Well, where do you want that instance? What operating system do you want? What how much memory do you need? What is it going to run? How do you lock it down? And then at some point, if you start saying all of these things, you've effectively written the Terraform code, which to begin with is kind of declarative. So I thought that was a good point, but I do want to say that I didn't get to that as much in the conversation. We talked about it a bit, which is, while that's true, at the same time, if I go to someone on our team, right, or like it was true in sort of Snyk's team, and I say, hey, can I create an EC2 instance? A lot of those decisions are actually implied, because they are implied in some form of practices or guides or things like that we have there in existing norms in the organization, in existing settings. And so while I agree that the sort of the assumptions are very much, like, if you need to specify everything, you might as well write the code. I do think a lot of it, and we got into that, a lot of it is like, if you know what are your general best practices and you're able to describe those to the AI, now suddenly you have something to cook with here, because you're able to give lightweight instructions, and AI will get pretty good at figuring out how to fill in the gaps, which was really like the crux of that conversation, which is, one way or the other, it's going to make a decision about whether this is, Windows or Linux, and US East or US West or whatever.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, isn't it? It's a case of, are you comfortable with the LLM filling in those gaps and making those decisions for each of those things? And one of the quotes that I absolutely loved was, 80% of the value is codifying 20% of the assumptions. And the important thing is recognizing what is those 20% of the assumptions. What are the areas that are core to me to actually make this, whether it's secure, whether it's, whatever it is, those are the pieces that I care about. The other areas, I'm fine for the LLM to make those decisions and fill those in for me. In fact, I don't really care what the operating system is, or I don't really care which region it's located. But it's about us as humans getting used to recognizing what that 20% is. And one other quote that he kind of provided was, the LLM is effectively going to make this bucket private or public, because it's in its training data, it's in more public buckets. So as a default, it's going to say, well, public. This is statistically more likely what you want. But actually, if that's not the assumption that you want for this infrastructure as code artifact, then you're actually producing something massively insecure, and it's about how you recognize this shouldn't be an assumption. This should be something I fill in, even if I do want to make it public. Perhaps I want to make that decision, not
Right.
you.
Yeah.
I guess, Guy, a question. Secure by default is an interesting theme that we've talked about a lot with code. I could argue actually that being insecure in infrastructure is actually far more damaging, because you could actually open up huge amounts of PII data and things just in a slight misconfiguration, and there's no need for someone to hack it. It's already open. Is there an outlook where an LLM is secure by default in infrastructure as code, or just generally?
Yeah, it's a really it's a thought that I kind of ponder a fair bit, and I think the answer is the LLM itself is not going to be truly trustworthy, maybe ever. And so for the LLM, what you can do is you can make it more frequently secure versus secure by default. I think it depends on the data that it gets trained on, which, by the way, oftentimes we don't know, and so it's hard. Like, yes, maybe you can guess that it's more public buckets, but can you guess on whether it's more Windows or Linux machines? I don't know. Those are a bit hard to guess. You can expect that they will improve because some form of training data will reinforce the weight of what were deemed good, including secure decisions for that system. And so I think some elements will improve, but they will not be secure by default. But I think where I'm very optimistic, and I talked about this a little bit with Caleb last month, Caleb Sima, is in the automated generation process. And I think that theme comes up again and again. We hear about the Glean combining symbolic AI, kind of search capabilities with LLMs to produce something that is a total better result on it. We know that at Snyk, Snyk code uses symbolic AI for assessment and combines that with LLM to produce fixes that actually fix the vulnerability. And so, and even not just combining it with other AI, just combining it with automated generation process, now you can do something that says, okay, if I define a policy, which I might have even created with AI, but then reviewed, and every time I generate a piece of infrastructure as code, every time it runs against my policy, and I can tell whether it is compliant with my creation. And so, the code itself that gets generated, I don't think we can trust that it will be secure. We can strive and invest in making it more often secure. But if you want something that really gives you a higher level of confidence, then really what you want to lean into is more the automation that happens around that code creation. Suddenly you've automated the developer, or at least a piece of the developer's work, and now you get the opportunity to introduce those other checks in a core fashion, and even loops that once a problem was found, it can get automatically fixed and continue along. So, and that I think is quite exciting. No, I mean that's that can basically make a whole bunch of problems go away, right? It just sort of takes the tedious methodical testing, including security testing, and run it. And I agree, by the way, with your comment that in infrastructure that's extra hard and also quite obscure. It's like, hey, here's a VPC configuration. Is it secure? Is it not secure? You need a pretty decent level of depth and understanding. And if you created this with some GitHub Spark, right, or some sort of Vault or something above, you may barely know what infrastructure as code is.
Yeah.
And so you are quite likely to not have the skills involved in doing that. So.
And the good news is, of course, this isn't a new ecosystem where all of this needs to be built. All of this already exists. And in fact, even because of things like DevOps now, speed going to production is much, much quicker. Tools, look at Snyk as a great example, right? Liran, who came from Snyk, and I think you're familiar with their work as well.
A little bit.
A little bit.
A little pop here in the corner.
Yeah, the dev angle, pulling security into dev, running that through the existing developer workflows. The whole point of this is to catch security issues earlier and to do it natively and in an automated way in the workflow. So adding LLMs into that workflow, we already have the guardrails there. We don't need to build new guardrails there. We just need to, like you say, automation, building those frameworks in which an LLM can exist just like another developer. So yeah,
I think the risk when we're having this conversation is that we're kind of carry the risk of sort of becoming a Snyk commercial a little bit in the element, which because like we're sort of both believers in sort of that sort of automating security into the dev process. I do think AI introduces a new form of automation, right? Like sort of a new opportunity for automation that could be super powerful. I do think though, like the other point that I know resonated with you as well was around but that Armon mentioned was around not just the beginning, but also the continuation, right?
Yes.
And I found in both my conversation with Armon and my conversation with Patrick, both of them, when you start the conversation, both are like smart DevOps people. They know the journey, and where they went was Armon initially said like, well, let me explain the different stages, the sort of the day 0, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. Eventually, like you build a system, then you found an incident, then you wanted to evolve it, then you had to realize you had to scale it. Eventually, you might want to sunset it. And when we think about AI, we keep thinking about, hey, I'm going to write some code, I'm going to do it. Is it good? Is it not good? And really, like his immediate mindset was, okay, how do I think about AI across the life cycle for it? And Patrick was similarly talking about culture, about sort of evolution, and about the adoption of these tools in the organization. And so the other thing that really kind of struck a chord with me in both of those conversations was really I think we're so enamored in the magic of like, hey, I'm gonna give you a line and the AI will kind of magically produce a Spark or whatever, and we're so enamored with that sort of moment that we just forget that oftentimes not only are we not solving the maintenance problem, we're actually causing a maintenance problem. Like you have this thing over here, you might have even made it secure at the beginning, but is anything, if you're going to start deploying the stuff all over the place, who's going to maintain it, who's going to sort of find the issues? So, and it was like, I found there isn't really one solution. It's almost like a bit of a, hey, don't forget this or we're going to get in trouble type comment. But definitely anybody that comes from the infrastructure world and has experienced a bit more of like the downstream implications of a bad upstream decision is very mindful of these risks that come with AI dev.
Absolutely, and I'd love to hear from people actually in the comments in terms of is the LLM flow today, the LLM creation flow today, far nicer from the creation point of view, getting to that stage where you can deploy versus almost like getting to that stage where you should deploy. And I'd love to hear kind of like what whether people have got into perhaps trouble. This is a safe place to share. Whether people have kind of like realized maybe later down the line that actually what we deployed needed updating or needed changing. Is that something? Is the maintenance burden bigger for you? Let us know in the comments. One thing also that kind of I found interesting with the Liran episode was he also drew a parallel back to the Stack Overflow days. And I remember, Guy, you were telling me off air that your development was pretty much entirely copy pasted from Stack.
It's all copy pasted.
It's all copy pasted.
Developer,
You had one of those keyboards which is just control.
That would have been plausible if it wasn't for my age, in which I kind of my coding kind of predates Stack Overflow.
Yeah, that's very true. Of course, you can't.
In 70 years of age, no, exaggerate.
You can't copy paste those punch cards, can you? I forgot about that. Yeah, but the interesting thing there was when you
can literally copy paste. Copy paste. Like the punch card is actually something you can actually physically copy paste.
Yeah, but the friction was harder.
The physical friction.
The physical friction. So I think when Liran brought this up and was like, well, when we think about people, whether they're interested in an IDE using Copilot, let's say, or Kodi or Tab 9 or whatever it is, and they're getting suggestions and they're accepting suggestions and they're doing it quickly, how different is that to Stack Overflow? And it's interesting because if you think about all the the reason why we have to be very careful about what we copy paste in Stack Overflow is, of course, because the average developer is inherently not great at coding, not quality of code, maintenance of code, the security of code. All of these aren't going to be great with the average developer, right? And so it's essential that we do testing and validation and things like that. With as a developer, I might need to go through a few Stack Overflows before I try and find the thing I want. I'm looking through the code much more in depth, and I have to copy it, move it back over to my IDE, paste it, make sure it's compiling, make changes to whatever variables I need to do. With Copilot, I hit Tab, And of course, the friction's far less. So actually, is it a worse problem almost from Stack Overflow? Because I hit tab, I just get it and I continue. It's already fully integrated into my IDE. It's beautiful from the lack of friction point of view, but from the possibility of accepting vulnerable code or code that isn't of the highest quality. And let's not forget, these tools are training on just the same code in Stack Overflow or Git repos and things like that.
And they give you just as much zero liability really around their notion, maybe a little bit more. But
exactly.
I think it was a really, really interesting comment. It was this like the evil side of zero friction, and a little bit of a be careful what you wish for. And it really reminded me of the whole incentive model that's going on right now with social media, right? If you're sort of on a TikTok or a YouTube Shorts and you're just scrolling along because these platforms have become so immensely good at reducing friction of watching the next video and finding something that you may find interesting. And it's almost like the analogy of, is GitHub Copilot equivalent to TikTok, when it comes to code writing, where they're just sort of attempting you to just sort of accept the next offer, and they've gotten very good at it. Of course, that's like a little bit inflammatory, but it's interesting to think that if we are relying on humans reviewing what has been created, then we have to be mindful of actually guiding the users to do that. And if the way the system is built is to hit tab, it's not that much different than swipe, and you're just going to accept those things because that's what the system guides you to do. So it's maybe like a little bit of like a platform responsibility to say, if you're going to encourage behavior like that, then you should be carrying some responsibility around what are the implications of that, and maybe build your system to introduce some responsibility.
Interesting comment here from Rachel as well. Nice parallel with autonomous vehicles, the mostly autonomous vehicles leading to accidents because people aren't used to paying attention. It's almost like if you entirely switch on or entirely switch off, you're more likely to have that shared responsibility knowledge.
Absolutely. Really good point.
So let's with Patrick, the session with Patrick, you took a walk down memory lane. Patrick Debois, of course, is the half brother of DevOps or something like that. The father of DevOps, I think they call it.
I think you called him the grandfather of DevOps.
Yeah. Oh, come on, guy. I make one mistake, guy.
I'm not going to let you forget that. Yeah, but I think the godfather of DevOps would be something that was like a little bit more palatable.
Yeah. That's the kind of nicer way of saying it, I suppose. We talked about there was a lot of really nice comparisons, really, with previous tech adoption, including cloud and DevOps and things like that. And one of the kind of like the big questions there was why AI tools are more easily adopted than cloud infrastructure, which is kind of like a nice one. And I think it's just far more accessible, right? With the APIs that are available. So, and that's one of the things that obviously OpenAI broke so quickly in terms of making that accessible to developers. When we think about from a maturity point of view, there's a lot of things happening here, and a lot of people trying to do a lot with it, whether or not it's ready for it. We can talk about AI engineers, we can talk about AI engineering, we can talk about platform teams, similar to how DevOps work, whereby they're creating paved roads or creating shared infrastructure in which teams can use the best practices that are already there, or at least best practices that we're trying to create. Your thoughts in and around that, because I feel like there's a lot of similarities with where we are as a community, as an industry in adopting AI.
Yeah, I think first of all, I think the analogy to DevOps and cloud native is super, super valuable, and we're going to continue probably pulling a little bit on that string, because I think there's a lot of learnings from us from that, and history rhymes, and you look at what has happened, and I think that's useful to try and understand where would this wave happen, or where would this wave take us. And I think the cloud was probably and with it sort of DevOps and continuous deployment and such are the probably the latest sort of big massive evolution, and so I think it's very much worth doing it. I think one of the key differences is really that of pace and ease of adoption. And what you see is in DevOps there were these like leading teams that would be using the cloud. And sometimes there were like digital transformation teams on it. They would have their own mandate to operate on this application or whatever. It was very declarative. It was very like, this team will move to the cloud. It was an expensive thing or a new application. And indeed, AI is like so interweavable that it's sort of easy to kind of throw it in. And so on one hand, Patrick described a really kind of good evolution that talks about how, okay, like there will be teams that will adopt this and will run ahead and they will set the standards, and maybe there will be some dedicated AI engineers like DevOps teams have come to be, and that really have their identity. And we see this now, and they're very good at that. And those teams will kind of draw the envy of the rest of the org, and more in the org will want to do this. And eventually, those teams will join and start doing this type of work, but then that type of work will become duplicated between the different teams. And so that drives the need for a platform team that creates that shared infrastructure, that paved road, so that not everybody reinvents the wheel, but also for security and for governance. So that was the journey of DevOps, and you can very much apply it to AI. And I think the one caveat is, will people wait, for this process? Like now you describe this process, it sounds slow. It's like, what do you mean? The board is like, hammering down, when is my AI chatbot coming out, right? And when is it that I can, let go half my support team because they're going to switch to using AI? And I think those conversations are much more urgent. And so, it's easy to interweave AI. It becomes a feature, a capability, but it behaves very differently. It behaves very differently in testing and evaluation. And so I think the model is a good one, and we need to think about these different stages, and companies, especially at like larger scale companies, need to think about how they adopt those. But I think, I guess what I took away is that it might be prudent for organizations to create those platform teams and invest in those shared controls early, and maybe be a bit more declarative around it, because otherwise, like, there's going to be a lot. Maybe it'll be a little bit more like SaaS adoption than infrastructure as code adoption, right? Because SaaS adoption did happen in like a shadow IT type way, where people just started using it, right, without telling anybody.
Yeah, interesting. And do you see that role almost sitting in the existing platform teams, or do you see that as almost like a separate team altogether, like as an AI adoption platform team, or whatever it's going to be called?
I think it's probably a dedicated team. Where it sits is probably organization dependent. But one of the points that both in the conversation with Patrick and with Armon came up is this notion of a bigger gap between the haves and the have-nots, which is, if you're an organization that is already mature from a DevOps perspective, then you probably have all sorts of advantages. You're familiar with kind of cloud native approaches. You might be a bit better at like breaking down silos. You might be a bit better at autonomous teams and empowered teams, so you can let people run with it. And you also probably have a very good platform team. You also probably have better data about how your system works, and you're able to describe that. You have better infrastructure as code. So like all of those sort of are advantages in your ability to adopt AI. So there might be a compounding effect to doing it. And so I think if you are an organization that's still quite immature in DevOps and doesn't want to go bankrupt, then you probably want to like really double down and maybe use AI as a springboard to jump ahead and create like autonomous empowered teams to build that out. If you're a DevOps organization, I mean, I guess my default assumption is that team, you do need dedicated people working on it, and they probably need to sit in the platform team. It is scary, as a sort of, with my security hat on, it is scary to think about the level of access. If you let one of Patrick's comments was that some organizations are overridden, they're sort of taken over by the data science folks, which I found an interesting comment. But it's, you hear it actually, like, it's CISOs will definitely nod at that comment, which is everybody is enamored with running things with AI and running things with data, and then you just glance at the production methodologies of these data stacks that we train on, of the data models and how they evolve in our version, of access to production, what they're being used on it, and it is generally not a pretty sight. Like there's a lot of like a lack of production knowledge amidst that group. So Yeah, it's fascinating, but there's a big culture, like you need to think about how do you organizationally organize here, and I think DevOps is a really good starting blueprint.
And I love your takeaway, well, not your takeaway, but your observation there that that you feel teams that are already good at DevOps and already good at being able to automate things with that level of, as they say, cars can only go fast because they've got good brakes. That ability to know when to stop and build a trust where you are in that automation, they're going to be better off with their adoption of AI because they've been through a lot of these challenges
Exactly.
before. So that's a really interesting observation. In terms of one of the things that people used when they increase their levels of DevOps maturity, I guess, rather than say let's try and get to the ultimate DevOps, they try to model this as a maturity ladder or maturity model. And they said, okay, let's not just try and get up to level 5. We need to work out what we're doing now. How do we take our first step? Because it's not just a technology problem; it's a process issue. It's a people problem. And so when we think about these same challenges that are going to occur with AI, are we presumably too early for a maturity model, right? Because we don't know what the best practices are or what this level 5 even looks like. And when we think about AI native, we don't know what AI native truly looks like or what the best practices are to get there, because no one's truly there just yet.
The irony is that probably half the enterprise you will talk to would really love to have a maturity model to sort of say, hey, you're at level 2, here are the steps you need to get to level 3. And the ironic part is that probably whoever is giving them that maturity model today is just making it up because like the right maturity models happen from observing organizations that have tried this. And this is just not tried and true yet. And so it's probably okay to still, draft some hypothesis around it, right? To think about what the next step, some journey. So it's not that you can't, find smart people and think about, what should you focus on first, and when you do that. But yeah, you and I have this conversation from time to time. It's just a little bit. Maybe this is sort of the DevOps purist in me, but it's a bit hard to accept calling it a maturity model. When there's basically nobody that's mature, let alone patterns that emerge.
Yeah, it's like having a nursery maturity model, right? It's
exactly. It's just at the beginning of it. At the beginning, first you need to get to these blocks, and then after that,
interesting. I'm not sure the name. Sorry, I didn't pull over from LinkedIn to our platform. But interesting comment here from LinkedIn user. Thank you, LinkedIn or Mr. Mrs. user. Thinking about DevOps and AI parallels. Isn't there a challenge where DevOps is easier to adopt a grassroots movement in the organization, whereas AI tools require a much higher bar of just general trust, I guess, or legal review because of the data aspects and things like that? And that's a really interesting question. I guess, with DevOps, you didn't have a lot of those challenges. There are more moving parts with various AI tools. And I think the legal aspects and the data aspects of what you need to share to these various tools is probably another challenge. So it's I think the workflows are quite similar. The workflow challenges are quite similar, but these are almost like additional challenges that needs to be worked on almost in parallel, I guess, compared to this. How do you react?
I would challenge that a little bit because, first of all, because I think a lot of the adoption of cloud was actually very much predicated on data access. So in that sense, it's the same. So maybe DevOps, in terms of some pace of deployment or methodology, was more internal. And so I think there were very much data concerns as big obstacles. People were like, there's no way I'm going to move my data into the cloud. And now this is the same. Two is there's a lot of shadow IT. So this is more maybe analogous to SaaS. You use them. Like nobody necessarily needs to know. Not everybody. A lot of people basically remain with vague definitions. And then lastly is that not all LLMs are hosted. I mean, if you want to use GPT or Anthropic, you might run it, but there are some pretty good local on-prem deployed LLMs that you can use, or things that are built into the cloud platforms. And so maybe you're still within AWS and you're running it. So I think there's actually a lot of adoption that's necessary. I think it's very scary. And so I think a lot of organizations have sort of issued these kind of broad bands that say you have to go through us.
Right.
That's probably natural. You can argue whether it's healthy or not, but what is, I think, guaranteed is it's a fast moving world, and so organizations need to figure out how do they limit sort of their access, but they allow some experimentation, or they're going to be left behind. So it's really interesting. And I do think that one of the cultural elements that, just sort of a last thing to mention from the Patrick conversation, one of the cultural elements that I think is similar to DevOps and again is urgent to address is just Patrick was pointing out that you have to figure out which silos needs to be broken here. And at first I was like, well, what silos? Like there's no silos here. But he pointed out correctly when we talked about that, the data science side is actually a bit of a silo. And this touches a little bit about this sort of production readiness and availability, but it really kind of moves you back to say, well, when we tried to get developers to not throw things over the wall so that ops will operate them, but rather have responsibilities, we had a bunch of these techniques of walk a mile in their shoes. Do you put a developer on call, which at the time was novel for a while? Do you have ops people need to write some code to build those out? And it's interesting to think about what does that do with data science? What does that do? You sit an ops person to sort of train a model? Do you do and then on top of all of that, what do we do with the acronym? Sort of a dev AI ops. Sec is somewhere in there. I think we've sort of exhausted this pattern.
We should add test as well. Yeah. Interesting, fun comment here from Ben. Wondering what the AI native version of a blameless post-mortem for DevOps is.
It's blame the AI. That's the
we can all agree. We can all agree.
We had someone on the team, Yaniv on the team, write an article says co-authored by Yaniv and C.GPT. So you blame CGPT.
Excellent. Determinism is another. So you mentioned the silos. This is I guess one of the big differences between AI and the DevOps culture. Determinism is another one which was mentioned in several episodes. And I think when I think it was Caleb Seema who you had a really good chat with him about determinism. And one of the questions that came up was how useful is a tool if, let's say, a security tool, if when you run it, it tells you there are no vulnerabilities, but the next second you run it again, it tells you there are 3 vulnerabilities. How useful is that determinism? Would you rather you actually had false positives in there, but it gave you the right answer every single time? And when we think about this, this level of automation, one thing you absolutely want is some level of determinism and determination. So such that if you run something 100 times, you're going to get the same result 100 times. You don't want that. Okay, it's passing, but is that because of just some deterministic kind of outcome, non-deterministic outcome, or is that because it genuinely is, correct?
I think it's a really interesting question. Yeah, and I guess what I would add is just that it's sort of a part of what we're talking about here with AI native development, right? Which is you can work within the existing workflow and think about how do you sort of optimize it, but that would only get you so far. I think if you really want to tap into these powers or into the opportunity of the sort of the new entity, you have to think about how do you rebuild or reimagine your workflows to accept the pros and the cons, the sort of the strengths and the weaknesses of AI native or like the world of AI, of something of an AI native workflow that assumes these capabilities are built in. And I think that is harder. It's like it's not as easy, but it is. It's more rewarding, right? If you manage to make it happen.
Yeah. Well, Guy, we're already pretty much at time. This flew by. And first of all, thank you, Guy, for joining me on this wonderful new format of a live episode.
Yeah, super fun and a lot easier without all the editing. Just joking.
Right?
Typically don't edit much.
Should we do that? We'll do a little bit of that. Yeah. Thank you everyone for joining in, and thank you for all the questions and the comments that I'm seeing fly past on LinkedIn. A couple of things you did mention. Actually, you've got a session. I think it's coming out next Tuesday with Matt Billman, right?
Yeah, really good conversation with Matt. sharp observations about the web and AI, what they're seeing from a Netlify lens, how they think about it inside, but really about, in general, how AI is affecting the web. How do we think about it both from building the web and from using the web, and even like AI as a user of the web, which was really interesting. Like Netlify has a new user, which is AI, and probably one of the most I don't know, like emotion driving conversations that we had there is also Matt pointing out that any new technology oftentimes challenges the open web, oftentimes challenges the openness as people try to build walled gardens. And we had a really good section there talking about the importance of preserving the open web and kind of deciding which side you're on and what does that mean. So brilliant insight from Matt. Highly recommend listening to it. It ended up being about 10 minutes longer than some past episodes just because there was so much to talk about. Highly recommended. Coming out soon on Tuesday. So just subscribe to the podcast and you'll see it. Did we say subscribe to the podcast already?
You should. Generally, it's a good life choice. It's a good life choice.
Here, no, we have a banner. Okay.
There we go. Do
really good conversation. I joking aside, like really worth signing up and listening to those.
Yeah, and if you're interested in seeing some of our amazing sessions that we've now announced for the AI Native DevCon, make sure you go to ainativedevcon.io to grab your ticket, free ticket, and everything will be replayed and recorded. So make sure you register to get those links as we send them. Once again, thank you very much, Guy, and let us know, podcast@tesla.ai, what you thought of the episode and what you'd also like to hear about in the AI native space. And we'll chat soon again. Tune into the next one.
Indeed. See you next time.
Thanks for tuning in. Join us next time on the AI Native Dev, brought to you by Tesla.